Schoenberg has a problem, and that problem is tonality. It's trite, it's hackneyed, it's played out. Everything that you can say with it has been said. He decides he needs to end the tyranny of tonality and end the reign of 7 of 12. What do I mean by that? Well, up till now, most music has been based on picking 7 of the 12 notes in an octave. If you look at a piano keyboard, there are 12 keys that repeat over and over all the way up the keyboard. These represent the 12 notes in Western music that you have from which to make scales. And a typical scale picks 7 of those notes, and they're labeled creatively enough: the root, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh. The 8th note is known as the octave, and it's effectively where you start over. These 7 notes are arranged in a kind of hierarchy, with the first note, or root, being the king, and then the 5th, and then the 4th, and then the 3rd, and the remaining notes all kind of being unimportant beneath that. And the way that most Western music works is you start on the root and you end on the root. And in between, you're just going away from it and coming back. And every time you go away, musical tension builds up. And when you come back, the musical tension relaxes. Think of major scales or minor scales. That's what I'm talking about. Over the centuries, music has reduced itself down to 2 main scales that are used: major and minor. To our ears, major scales generally sound happy, and minor scales generally sound sad. Schoenberg's an expressionist, so he wants maximum intensity all the time, with no slackening of tension. Well, if tonal music is all about creating tension and then releasing it, he wants to stop that. Tonal music's not going to work for him because it always releases its tension. It's not satisfactory for him. So he starts working on something else. It's not easy to move beyond tonality. Tonality is such a fundamental characteristic of music that many people incorrectly believe that it's somehow inherent in music itself, that it's like something like gravity or light. It's a force that has to be obeyed. But it doesn't. Tonality is a learned behavior. And you learn that a major or minor scale sounds right just because you hear it over and over again. In fact, it's so deeply ingrained that if I start playing a major scale and then stop before I finish it, it will drive some people crazy. Schoenberg starts working on music that was not tonal, and in 1909 he debuts 3 piano pieces which critics label atonal, which is a term that Schoenberg despises. These pieces cause quite a stir, not just for their atonality, but also for their extreme brevity. Because one of the other things that Schoenberg was trying to get rid of was repetition and development in music. His idea was, look, if I've already stated my idea, why do I have to keep saying it over and over again and making it more elaborate? If I say it once, why do I need to say it again? He also starts developing something called the Klangfarbenmelodie, which is a German word that means timbre melody. And that's really what it is. His idea was, look, if I can make a melody out of stringing a series of pitches together, why can't I do the same thing by just changing the timbre? It's just another parameter of music that I can vary. But his most exciting work is yet to come. In 1912, Schoenberg debuts a piece named Pierrot Lunaire, which, translated from the original French, means something like Pierre in the Moonlight or Moonstruck Pierre. Schoenberg was very much into numerology. He was fascinated with numbers, and numerology assigns all sorts of different mystical importances to different types of numbers. Well, this was going to be his 21st piece, or his 21st opus, and so he decided that he was going to make it consist of 21 pieces. He takes 21 poems by the Belgian symbolist poet Albert Giraud and sets them to music. These poems are all rondeaus, which means that they have 13 lines. And you take the first and second line, and you use them again as the 7th and the 8th line. And then you take the first line, and you use it again as the 13th line. These poems all center around this Pierrot character, who is a classic stock clown type from the Commedia dell'arte. Now, I'm not talking one of these typical bozo the clown who gives the kids balloons. I'm talking about the sort of laughing on the outside, crying on the inside kind of clown that's really creepy. And that's who this Pierrot is. Schoenberg scores this piece for 5 musicians playing 8 instruments: piano, flute and piccolo, clarinet and bass clarinet, violin and viola, and cello, and voice. Schoenberg had originally started working on this piece as a favor to a female vocalist friend of his who wanted something that she could recite against an orchestral background. This also worked nicely for Schoenberg because for a long time he'd been interested in the idea of working the spoken voice into music in some sort of new and interesting way. He invented a new technique called Sprechstimme or Sprechgesang, which means spoken word or speech song. This vocal technique required the performer to speak on exact pitches and in a particular rhythm, but Schoenberg indicated that the reciter was to start on the written note, but immediately rise or fall away in pitch. It sounded something like this. This rather bizarre, creepy sound was perfect for the expressionist ideas that he was trying to convey, and it also suited perfectly the rather disturbing poems he had selected. Additionally, these pieces worked because the poems were all very short. Schoenberg was still experimenting with this notion of atonality, and he was finding it very hard to compose for lengths of time without having any of the traditional rules or structures to guide him. The shortness of the pieces allowed him to experiment without having to worry about developing the pieces very fully. Leaving all the rules behind is very difficult, and Schoenberg would spend the next several years grappling with this hurdle.